get started. We're going into our parabolic studies, and we're doing the parable of the laborers in the vineyard. If you look at Matthew chapter 20, in verse 1 through 16, we'll read that before we get started. But you can see all the parables on our YouTube channel as we present the parables. We've got a whole list of them. We're trying to do all of them so that they're not shrouded in secrecy anymore. You can learn them, you can know them, you can see them. They're not meant to be this spiritual mystery. They're not meant to be something that God said where you have to figure it out and how to apply them into your own life. They're not meant to be literally applied into your own life. You can get some spiritual nuggets or spiritual truths out of what God was trying to teach to Israel, to the Jews, during the time and history of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And that's where we're at right now, as far as what we're studying right now. We're in the dispensation of grace in Romans through Philemon. That's literally where we are today. But as we go through the parables, we can understand the parables. That's why the titles are what they are. We can understand the parables, we can learn from them, and understand what the Lord was teaching, which was kingdom principles, kingdom understanding, kingdom timing, kingdom lessons, kingdom concepts to the Jews that were paying attention to them. So we see here in Matthew chapter 20, the parable of the laborers in the vineyard. Verse 1 says, "For the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that is an householder, which went out early in the morning to hire laborers into his vineyard. And when he had agreed with the laborers for a penny a day, he sent them into his vineyard. And he went out about the third hour, and saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and said unto them, Go ye also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right I will give you. And they went their way. Again, he went about the sixth and ninth hour, and did likewise. And about the 11th hour he went out, and found others standing idle, and saith unto them, Why stand ye here all the day idle? They say unto him, Because no man hath hired us. He saith unto them, Go ye also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right, that shall ye receive. So when even was come, the Lord of the vineyard saith unto his steward, Call the laborers, and give them their hire, beginning from the last unto the first. And when they came that were hired, about the 11th hour, they received every man a penny. But when the first came, they supposed that they should have received more, and that likewise received every man a penny. And when they had received it, they murmured against the goodman of the house, saying, These last have wrought but 1 hour, and thou hast made them equal unto us, which have borne the burden of the heat of the day. But he answered one of them and said, Friend, I do thee no wrong. Didst thou not agree with me for a penny? Take that thine is, and go thy way. I will give unto this last even as unto thee. Is it not lawful for me to do that what I will with mine own? Is thine eye evil because I am good? So the last shall be first, and the first last. For many shall be called, but few chosen. And so you're pretty much seeing in verse 16 the two lessons that are being taught to Israel here. One is that the last shall be first, and the first last in the kingdom, in the earthly kingdom. That's lesson number 1. For many be called, but few chosen. That's lesson 2, concerning Israel and their earthly kingdom. So there's 2 lessons being taught here in Matthew chapter 20, the parable of the laborers in the vineyard. So he starts out going back all the way to verse 1, and he's building on this. What this is meant to be is an illustration. And what it's meant to be, this whole parable is where he starts out and saying, For the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that is an householder, which went out early in the morning to hire laborers into his vineyard. He's starting out and he's saying, this is how I'm going to illustrate a certain point. But the point he's looking to illustrate, we have to go back just a couple verses. And we go back to Matthew chapter 19 and just verse into 27. Matthew chapter 19, verse 27, about 4 verses back. And this conversation, it says, Then answered Peter and said unto him, Behold, we have forsaken all and followed thee. What shall we have therefore? And Jesus said unto them, Verily I say unto you, that ye which have followed me in the regeneration, when the Son of Man shall sit in the throne of his glory, when also ye also shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And everyone that hath forsaken houses, or brethren, or sisters, or father, or mother, or wife, or children, or lands, for my name's sake, shall receive and 100-fold, and shall inherit everlasting life. But many that are first shall be last, and the last shall be first. So he just got done saying this to Peter, and Peter just got done asking him a question. And so the Lord's like, well, let's illustrate this. Let's do a parable. Let's explain these kingdom principles, these kingdom concepts of inheritance, and what exactly do I mean when I told you this, Peter, in Matthew chapter 19, verse 27 through 30. Let's illustrate these concepts so that you get a clear understanding of what I mean. And so as he goes through and he says this, he's saying in verse 29, everyone that hath forsaken houses or brethren or sisters or father or mother or wife or children or lands for my name's sake shall receive 100-fold. Everyone does. And shall inherit everlasting life. Everyone that does this, at least. Everyone who gives everything up and does what he says. And so then we start out in verse 20, or chapter 20, verse 1, I'm sorry. Chapter 20, verse 1. For the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that is an householder, which went out early in the morning to hire laborers into his vineyard. And again, the vineyard, if we look at Isaiah chapter 5, we just read this for another study that we just did, but we'll read this again for the benefit of this study, which is a separate study. Isaiah chapter 5, verse 1. When the Lord is talking here, and he always mentions the vineyard, you'll see churches that call themselves the vineyard. You already know that they have their identity mixed up. If they say, well, I'm part of the vineyard, or I am the vineyard, I go to the church called the vineyard, they think they're Israel. Because you see here it says, I went out early in the morning to hire laborers into his vineyard. Isaiah chapter 5, verse 1 says, now will I sing to my well-beloved the song of my beloved touching his vineyard. That's Israel. My well-beloved hath a vineyard in a very fruitful hill, and he fenced it and gathered out the stones thereof, and planted it with the choicest vine, and built a tower in the midst of it, and also made a winepress therein, and looked that it should bring forth grapes, and it brought forth wild grapes. When you get to verse 7, it says, for the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his pleasant plant. And he looked for judgment, and behold oppression, for righteousness, but behold a cry. So you see in verse 7 of Isaiah chapter 5, for the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel. And so we see the description, the vineyard is the house of Israel. When he says here in chapter 20, verse 1, early in the morning to hire laborers into his vineyard, into the house of Israel. And so we see that there. It says, when he had agreed with the laborers for a penny a day, he sent them into his vineyard. Again, he's sending out laborers into his vineyard. You can also see this in Matthew chapter 10, verse 5 and 6, the instructions of what they're to do to go out and labor. I'll just read that real quick for the benefit of the study. Matthew chapter 10, in verse 5, it says, these 12 Jesus sent forth and commanded them, saying, go not into the way of the Gentiles, and into any city of the Samaritans enter ye not, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and as ye go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, and cast out devils. Freely ye have received, freely give. And as we said, those are the marching orders, those are the instructions, that's the work, that's the labor that they're to do, as it says, the hire laborers into the vineyard. That's the work that Israel's to do as they reach their own lost in the vineyard. It says that when he had agreed with the laborers for a penny a day, he sent them into his vineyard. Now, there's literally a Roman currency during this time of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John called a penny. So the illustration of the parable does make sense that the penny would be that which is used. But you see here in it says, and when he had agreed with the laborers for a penny. Now they come to an agreement on something. And when we see what it was, the penny a day is going to equal what you see in verse 29 of Matthew chapter 19. He says, they shall receive 100-fold and shall inherit everlasting life. So that's the agreement. You give everything up, you'll get 100-fold back. I don't care who you are. The Lord's talking as he's saying this is whoever gives it up, they get 100-fold back based on how much they gave up. Everyone that hath forsaken houses or brethren or sisters or father or mother or wife or children or lands for my name's sake shall receive 100-fold and shall inherit everlasting life. So that's the penny a day. When you equate that back into this parable, there's your penny a day type of thing, is that you're getting 100-fold back. That's the agreement that they're making. So when he had agreement to laborers for a penny a day or 100-fold back, he sent them into his vineyard. And so he sends them out there. That's in verse 2. And so they start to send them out. And so he just told the disciples that they'll be ruling in the millennial kingdom. He told them that in chapter 19, and that everyone who gives up everything on earth will be rewarded 100-fold. So it expands upon. This is what the expanse is on. Verse 3 says, and he went out about the third hour and saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And the marketplace is something you see coming up in various other parts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. If you look at Matthew chapter 11, you see in verse 16, just the concept of the marketplace. It says that, but whereunto shall I liken this generation? It is like unto children sitting in the markets, calling unto their fellows, and saying, we have piped unto you, and ye have not danced. We have mourned unto you, and ye have not lamented. But this idea of the markets, the marketplace, it's something that's a literal physical place that you find out there in Israel. But he says, and he went out the third hour and saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And verse 4 goes forward and says, and he said unto them, go ye also into the vineyard, go out into Israel, and whatsoever is right I will give you. And they went their way. So again, also, whatever they give up, they're going to get 100-fold back for whatever they give up. And so they see that. And it says, and again, it went out about the 6th and the 9th hour and did likewise. So these different times, as time is marching on, there's more people that are the Lord is making this agreement with. Or as it says there, excuse me, the householder, as he goes out at these different times, along the timeline, he's finding different people that will work for him, that will do the work. And he sends them out and makes the same deal with them. You give everything up, you'll get 100-fold back when that kingdom comes. But it's the parable is explaining it as, hey, it's a penny a day, penny a day, penny a day. And so as he goes forth, he says this, verse 4, and said unto them, go ye also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right I will give you. And they went their way. Verse 5 says, and he went out about the 6th hour, or the 6th and the 9th hour, and did likewise. And then verse 6, and then about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing idle, and saying to them, why stand ye here all the day idle? And so when the parable gets explained, you're seeing these different hours of the day. And the first workers were hired in this parable, about 6 a.m., and the second batch around 9 a.m., and the third about noon, and the fourth about 3 p.m., and the last group about 5 p.m. So this last group, literally in the parable, worked about an hour, meaning they were done at 6 p.m. at the end of the Hebrew day, according to their time clock, according to their ways of understanding time. So the parable explains the literal Hebrew day, yet the deeper context goes further. So the time span, as we plug this into Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and beyond, as far as getting things ready for the kingdom, according to what Israel has on their timeline and on their map, says the time span relates to Israel's history from gathering the lost sheep into the little flock, from the time of John the Baptist in Matthew chapter 3, all the way up to the last hour of the Great Tribulation. And so when you see that early morning, third hour, going back into seeing everything from the early morning, from verse 1, early in the morning, all the way to about the third hour that you see there in verse 3, that's the early start where you're seeing John the Baptist and people are coming unto him, specifically in Israel, and he's getting laborers are getting hired to do the work, quote unquote. That's the third hour. When you get into that 6th hour, the Lord himself is there in the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and he's getting people ready to do the work as well. That's where you're getting Peter and the 12, and they're walking in. So you got people before Peter there with John the Baptist. Then you get into the 9th hour, and you get into the book of Acts, and you got people who are showing up, doing the work, but you had people there before they showed up. And then the 11th hour is where it says there in the day, I think it's in, it says in verse 6, he says, found others standing idle, and saith unto them, and about the 11th hour he went out, and found others standing idle, and saith unto them, Why stand ye here all the day of the Lord? Now you're all the way up to the day of the Lord now, idle. And they say unto him, Because no man hath hired us. Essentially, no one got the gospel of the kingdom to them yet. He saith unto them, Go ye also into the vineyard, and go back into Israel, and whatsoever is right, that shall ye receive. Again, making the same deal with everyone. You go out there, you give everything up, you receive 100-fold. That's the deal. And then so verse 8, so when even was come, the Lord of the vineyard saith unto his steward, Call the laborers, and give them their hire, beginning from the first unto the last. If you get Matthew chapter 22, verse 9. Last unto the first? Oh, last unto the first, other way around. Matthew chapter 22, verse 9. You kind of see a little bit about this in different parables here. But Matthew chapter 22, verse 9 says, Go ye therefore into the highways, and as many as ye shall find, bid to the marriage. So those servants went out into the highways and gathered together all as many as they found, both bad and good, and the wedding was furnished with guests. And so in different parables, you're seeing details that can be learned and understood into other parables. And that's what we're seeing here. And so as it gets forward, it says, And they came that were hired about the 11th hour, and they each received a penny. They got that 100-fold. Even those that were in that 11th hour, during the day, that day, the day of the Lord, they received all that. They received 100-fold, just as those that were early received 100-fold. The deal was made with everybody that they would all receive, according to Matthew chapter 19, verse 29, everyone that hath forsaken houses, or brethren, or sisters, or father, or mother, or wife, or children, or lands, for my name's sake, shall receive 100-fold, and shall inherit everlasting life. The Lord made that promise to all that would join up with them. And so verse 8 says, And so when even was come, the Lord of the vineyard saith unto his steward, Call the laborers, and give them their hire, beginning from the last unto the first. Goes forth and mentions that there in verse 8. And when they came that were hired about the 11th hour, they received every man a penny, and they received their 100-fold. And verse 10 says, But when the first came, they supposed that they should have received more, and they likewise received every man a penny. So those that were there, starting with John the Baptist, in that third hour, illustrated in the parable here, thought perhaps that they should have gotten more than even Peter, more than the 12, more because they were there longer. Peter did show up a short time afterward. The 12 show up a short time after. They get called one by the Lord. But those that were there with John the Baptist in Matthew chapter 3, literally they were there time-wise longer. So they're thinking when the first came, they suppose that they should have received more, and they likewise received every man 100-fold. They all received what the Lord said they were going to get 100-fold. And then verse 11, and when they had received it, they murmured against the goodman of the house. So imagine the mindset of people that go into the kingdom and inherit eternal life, and they murmur against it. They say, well, it's only 100-fold. Imagine that. Imagine how the reality of humanity is, that you, not us, not the body of Christ, but that people would go into the kingdom receiving 100-fold for everything they gave up, enduring through the great tribulation, and then they'd murmur against it. Say, well, they'd still say that's not fair. I want more. Give me more of what I want more than the other guy. And they'd still be saying that even as they go into the kingdom. Humanity would be doing that. The little flock of Israel. But verse 11, and when they had received it, they murmured against the goodman of the house, saying, in verse 12, these last have wrought but 1 hour, and thou hast made them equal unto us, which have borne the burden and heat of the day of the Lord. So they're saying we've been through more, we've been persecuted more, we've been pushed through more, we've gone through more, and even the burden and heat of the day. And verse 13, but he answered one of them and said, Friend, I do thee no wrong. Didst thou not agree with me for a penny? 100-fold. You all agreed to 100-fold. So what's the problem? Verse 14, take that thine is and go thy way. I will give unto this last, even as unto thee. Is it not lawful for me to do what I will with mine own? Is thine eye evil because I am good? And in verse 16 is the result of it all. So the last shall be first, and the first last, for many be called, but few chosen. Since the Lord Jesus Christ is speaking directly to the disciples, we understand that since they were the ones that were one of the last ones that were uh, not one of the very last ones, but they were chosen into service, before others and yet after others. They get to see Israel bear fruit, some of Israel bear fruit, and yet they walked in and Israel was already bearing fruit. So they're kind of walking in during, sort of the middle point, but not exactly. But it says that, and yet they'll get to go in, into the kingdom being the judges of the 12 tribes. They'll get to be, um, those who will be rulers will be installed into their place of leadership, before others even get to come in. And so the first will be last, and the last will be first. And if you look at Matthew chapter 8, verse 11, Matthew 8, verse 11, you even see a little bit of a picture of the kingdom here. Matthew chapter 8, verse 11. It says, "And I say unto you that many shall come from the east and west, and shall sit down with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the children of the kingdom shall be cast out into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth." And that's talking about the centurion who has faith here. But you're seeing even when it's not just going to be um, the 12 and those who have given up all that they had so that they receive a hundredfold, but eventually, the last will be first and the first will be last. Eventually, you're going to get into seeing Abraham walking into the kingdom. Then you're going to see Isaac walking into the kingdom. Then you're going to see King David walking into the kingdom. Then you're going to see Jacob walking into the kingdom. And are they still going to sit back and say, well, that's not fair? I mean, at some point, they have to recognize that there are going to be rulers and a specific kingdom order to what's supposed to be taking place. And what God declares to be, the leadership of the kingdom, when that comes to pass and how it's going to come out and work itself out, that's how it's going to be with how this works. So you get to see how kingdom inheritance works when it comes to this parable here, as well as the other two things we were seeing when it comes to the first shall be last and the last first, for many shall be called and few chosen. And also you can see a lot that comes to do with, as we were talking about a little bit earlier, when it comes to the idea of the watchful servant and the faithful and the wise servant. Because this is speaking only specifically to the disciples here. But if we look at, I believe it's going to be Luke chapter 12, verse 22, this is only speaking for inheritance for those who give everything up, inheritance for those who join up with the little flock. And even amongst the little flock, they're deciding, well, I want more than this guy, and I think I should get more than Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Peter, whatever. So these are the good guys, and they're squabbling amongst themselves. And yet everything does work out. They'll be faithful. They'll do that which is right. Yeah. But those are the good guys. Now, when it comes to those who are going to, let me see if I got the right verses here. Luke 12, verse 35. Now you're getting to a situation where the Lord is explaining not just the concept of inheritance, but he's talking about those who are watchful and those who are not watchful, those who lose everything. And because they weren't watchful, because they weren't faithful, because they weren't a part of selling all that they had and doing that which was right in the first place, for whatever reason, they're maybe part of the three parts of the soil, the thorny, the wayside, and the stony, from the parable of the sower, they lose everything. And again, we discussed this before, but Luke chapter 12, verse 35, he says in this parable, he says, "Let your loins be girded about and your lights burning. And ye yourselves like unto men that wait for their Lord, when he will return from the wedding, that when he cometh and knocketh, that they may open unto him immediately. Blessed are those servants whom the Lord, when he cometh, shall find watching. Verily I say unto you, that he shall gird himself and make them to sit down to meat, and will come forth and serve them. And if he shall come in the second watch, or come in the third watch, and find them so, blessed are those servants." And we know from Revelation 1:1, the servants are Israel. That's how we know the book of Revelation is written to Israel. That's all about servants. Galatians 4 says the body of Christ are not servants, we're sons. Totally different. 2 Timothy 2:15, we rightly divide the scriptures so we can understand this. Verse 39, "And this know, that if the goodman of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched." So whereas the parable we're reading now here in Matthew chapter 20 is giving information about inheritance for the little flock of Israel, how that's going to work out. You're seeing here in this example of Luke chapter 12, you're seeing inheritance belonging to, are you watching or are you not watching? Are you believing or unbelieving? This is going out to the crowd, seeing, you're going to be left in the dust if you're not. It's not just about inheritance, it's about you. Are you even going to get in? Versus those who are watchful and they receive 100-fold. He says in verse 37, blessed are those servants whom the Lord, when he cometh, shall find watching. Verily I say unto you, that he shall gird himself and make them to sit down to meat, and will come forth and serve them. And if he shall come in the second watch or come in the third watch and find them so, blessed are those servants. So he's giving a differentiation between believing and unbelieving. Of course, verse 39 is the unbelieving remnant of or the unbelieving group of Israel, the other three types of soil that you find from the parable of the sower. And this know that if the goodman of the house had known at what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not have suffered his house to be broken through. Be ready, be therefore ready also, for the Son of Man cometh at what hour ye think not. And then he goes forth. There's Peter in verse 41. Peter said unto him, Lord, speakest thou this parable unto us, even unto all? So he's saying, you just talking only to, in this Luke 12 parable, you just talking to the faithful little flock of Israel, or are you talking to the whole crowd? And he goes forth and he explains it even further. Like in verse 45, he says, if that servant saith in his heart, my Lord delayeth his coming, shall begin to beat the men servants and maidens, and begin to eat and drink and be drunken. Which means they're losing it. They're not faithful. They're not holy. They're not worthy. They're not doing the work that the Lord tells them in Matthew chapter 5 and 6 and 7 and chapter 10. They're not obedient to the truth that he was teaching in the parables of Matthew chapter 13. The Lord of that servant will come in a day when he looketh not for him, and at an hour when he is not aware, and will cut him in sunder, and will appoint him his portion with the unbelievers. And that servant which knew his Lord's will and prepared not himself, and neither did according to his will, shall be beaten with many stripes. And it kind of goes on from there. So you're seeing that you've got all sorts of different, I say, groups. You've got unbelieving Israel. You've got those in the little flock that knew the will and didn't do it. You've got those that are part of the little flock that knew the will and did do it. So you've got all sorts of groups. And then you've got those that are in the flock that knew the will, did it, and still complained that they didn't get as much as the next guy. So you're seeing all sorts of different personalities and different types of, interesting things just to put together under a big magnifying glass, the little flock. And the fact that they may come out of the Gentile group, they may come out of the Jewish group, and they're all part of that little flock of Israel in prophecy under law. And yet they have many different thoughts and things among them that we're seeing through these parables. And that's what the parables are meant to do, is they're meant to, teach a lesson to the little flock of Israel, get them ready. The parable of the laborers in the vineyard, they're teaching kingdom inheritance concepts, letting them know you give up 100-fold, no matter what time you walk in, you're going to get 100-fold. This is what you truly do. And yet you're also seeing them talk about, that there's the first will be last and last will be first. And you also see there it talks about for many are called and few are chosen. So this works out pretty good. Well, then we can plug in other information from other parables, get other details to help light up and add information into this parable. And that's what helps with studying the parables, is that other information is made known so that we're not here kind of scratching our heads saying, I wonder how I apply these parables into our lives today, because you don't. These are not parables meant for your day-to-day life today. These were meant for those who are going into the earthly kingdom, which are Jews, which are Israel. They are meant to learn this, know this, believe this, and understand this, so they know how to get inheritance, when to be ready, who to be watching out for, and what to be on their guard for, and on a whole lot more. So we see that there, and I believe that was pretty much where we were looking to go with this. And see if there's one more point of lesson we can kind of rehash, if I can find it. And I think with that, we're pretty much about to wrap it up. But pretty much that was where we were looking to go with this, is that these parables, they serve as, we'll just kind of come back to it, I guess. But those were meant to be the parables that we go through today. This one was meant to be the one we could zoom in on, was the parable of the laborers in the vineyard. from Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. So with that, we'll stop a little bit early, wrap up here, and we'll continue next time with our parabolic studies. Well, in fact, I believe we're going to wrap it up. We're going to get through 2 more parables, and that should be all of the parables in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the entire, pretty much the entire Bible, because we've covered other parables by covering the parables. So we'll do 2 more and wrap up the entire study next time. So have any thoughts or comments or questions on anything?
I do, but I'm going to ask you off the record, sort of.
Okay, so we'll get to the questions a little bit later, but yeah. Aside from that, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. We've got everything lined up on not only our playlist when it comes to the parables, but you can see we've got a multitude of playlists now. We've got playlists. We were able to find studies from 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and get them applied into our YouTube channel. So you can see studies on Galatians, First Corinthians, Titus, on different religious studies that we've done, all sorts of things. They're all there waiting for everyone to just go ahead and take a look at. And so with that, we'll stop here and we'll continue next time in our studies. See everyone later.
Bye, everybody.
Yep, everyone take care.